quite an interesting book that we're going to talk to you about up next. It's a book is for those who want to understand the full intricacies, I suppose, the nitty-gritty of the Washington-London-Bonn-Pretoria relationship during the years of white minority rule, and of course the tough strategic and moral questions that it raised. Well, that's according to Caxton Professor of Journalism at Wits University, Anton Harber, who is describing Ron Nixon's Selling Apartheid, which tells the story of the South African propaganda campaign run with military precision, which involved a worldwide network of supporters, including global corporations with business operations in South Africa. Conservative religious organizations also formed part of that network, as well as an unlikely coalition of liberal U.S. black clergy and anti-communist black conservatives aligned with right-wing Cold War politicians. It sounds like a mouthful, and I believe there's a lot in there that one can unpack. Ron, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Give us a brief synopsis of what Selling Apartheid is about. I've tried to cover it. Did I hit the nail on the head? Can you elaborate?
You did. That in a nutshell is what it's about. This idea of selling the ideology of apartheid. I mean, you sell it like you sell soap or you sell Coca-Cola or something, which is why they hired all of these public relations firms and marketing firms to get the message out early on that apartheid was okay, and then later to stop sanctions in the U.S. and Europe from being imposed on the apartheid government.
So it was a clear strategy set out that we are going to use various machineries, various mediums to propagate this idea that segregation was justified in South Africa.
Yes, yes. It was a very clear strategy, and again, as you mentioned before, it was run with military precision.
Speak to us about why you decided to put this book together. Writing a book is no easy feat. What made you wake up one morning and decide I'm going to put pen to paper and eventually type this out?
I think it was over a series of mornings, not just one morning, but you know, having heard about the apartheid movement in the U.S., anti-apartheid movement in the U.S. Growing up during that time, you know, I knew some things about it, but I thought that there were some myths that had been perpetuated about the involvement of some people, but also, you know, what it was really about. So I just decided to take a look at it and see what the full story was. You know, how involved was the South African government in trying to push this ideology, particularly in the U.S. and Europe. And so one thing led to another. There were surprising findings, like the fact that black Americans were involved in this, and that it was much more extensive than we previously thought.
Now, we are 21 years into our democracy as South Africa. We've gone to great lengths and extents to try and unpack and uncover all the details of what happened during apartheid. What is new in this book that we can get out of it that perhaps we didn't know?
Right. Well, I think what's new, and one of the things I found fascinating, as I just mentioned before, that there were black Americans who lobbied for the South African government. And as a matter of fact, the very first one was in 1948, when the National Party was coming to power. Their first global lobbyist was a black American who had lived here in South Africa for 13 years and was a mentor to Govan Mbeki. Taught at Fort Hare and lived in the Eastern Cape. So, you know, just things like that were just surprising. And there was also a minister that I interviewed in the book, Minister Caldwell, who had participated in anti-apartheid struggles and then became, you know, involved in one of the campaigns to stop sanctions against the South African government. So, you know, and I think the other thing too is just how extensive it was and how much money was involved.
I mean, I'm looking at the cover of the book and how it really looks familiar to the Coca-Cola brand, if I may be explicit in naming the brand. It now speaks about these networks and how corporate was also very much involved.
Yes, I mean, you know, particularly American and European corporations had very large operations here in South Africa and didn't want to give those up, so they helped, you know, fight against sanctions, and you know, they pushed back to say that, well, sanctions would really hurt blacks here, so this is why we have to stay. If we don't provide jobs, then blacks would be harmed by this.
Does it suggest anything about possible restitution and what needs to be done?
You know, I know that there were some lawsuits filed against corporations about their involvement in the apartheid years. I don't know the status of those. That's hard to really prove. So I don't know if that will ever come to bar. But it's an interesting question.
Yeah. Okay. Ron, we'll have to leave it there, I'm afraid. I must also just mention that the book includes thousands of previously unreleased records from both the South African and the United States archives that will help shed light on this really, really interesting piece of literature. It is definitely a must read. We'll have to leave it there. Ron Nixon is a Washington correspondent for the New York Times. He joins us to tell us more about the book that he has authored, Selling Apartheid. We'll have to leave it there, at least for now, and take a look at our headlines up next. Thank you once again for joining us.